Good morning, everyone. My name is Ryan Evans, and I'm the Executive Director at Chambers for Innovation and Clean Energy. Chambers for Innovation and Clean Energy, or affectionately known as CICE, is an organization that works with chambers of commerce and economic development organizations to advance an equitable clean energy economy. We focus on promoting good clean energy policy and programs and look to amplify the incredible economic benefits associated with clean energy. Our nationwide network represents more than 1,300 chambers of commerce and economic development organizations. Founded and led by former chamber executives, CICE works with these associations throughout the United States, including very large member associations and the smallest, those in red and blue states, as well as urban and rural communities. And it's a pleasure to be with all of you today. We thank you for joining us and our co-host, the Florida Association of Chamber Professionals, to our discussion today that will focus on three timely topics in Florida. Those are clean energy and resilience issues being discussed during the Florida legislative session, net metering and rooftop solar, one of the issues above that you have likely seen a good amount of in the media and throughout just discussions up at the Capitol. And then as well, what funds will be available for infrastructure investments, including EV charging, via the bipartisan infrastructure bill that passed in Washington a few months ago, and how your chamber and community can be more involved in the rollout of EVs in Florida. So to start the discussion today, we are going to be a little fluid in our discussion because we are being joined by Representative Soto, who will be coming on in just a little bit. He had to change up his schedule. So just so you know, we will be potentially a little fluid, but we will welcome him when he joins and accommodate that schedule as needed. So our first topic of discussion today will be net metering. Net metering and rooftop solar. Net metering is easily one of the most public legislative discussions at the Florida Capitol and throughout the media. So we felt it would be appropriate to at least cover some background on both the issue and the policies that are being debated at the State House. The challenge we found is that most people are not very familiar with net metering and with rate making for utilities in general. And therefore, we felt it would be good just to provide some background on net metering, what it is and isn't, and some high level questions and concerns that the two bills presented by the Senate and House we've seen in our evaluation of those bills. After the brief introduction that I provide, we've invited Chuck Yaros, who is the Associate Consultant for Economics at the Washington Economics Group, to join the conversation. Mr. Yaros has over 20 years of experience as a business and financial economist, having worked in a number of positions of progressive responsibility in the South Florida business community. Additionally, he has spoken and taught courses on financial risk management. Chuck received his undergraduate degree in economics with honors from Trinity College and his master's degree in economics from Duke University, where he also completed coursework for a PhD degree. Chuck and his family are residents of Coral Gables, Florida. So again, I will invite Chuck to join the conversation here shortly. But for now, I'm going to, again, roll into sort of a nuts and bolts discussion of net metering. So with that, what is net metering? And I apologize if some of you understand this, but my gut is that many of you do not. Net metering is a billing mechanism that allows residential and commercial customers who have rooftop solar installations to sell unused or excess energy they produce on their facility to the utility. Typically, this results in a credit on the customer's energy bill that helps offset future electricity expenses. Is it a subsidy? And what changes do the bills in the state legislature propose? First of all, it's not a subsidy. Net metering is a billing mechanism that simplifies the sale of excess energy from a customer to the utility at an agreed upon rate. Often that rate is at the retail electric rate, but there are many cases throughout the country where the rate is actually higher than retail because of the value that distributed energy generated not at a single power plant, brings to the grid, and sometimes it is lower than retail. But what we do know is there's costs and benefits. There are many factors that go into determining the value of energy, which is also true for the value of solar energy generated on a rooftop. For that reason, it's important that if change is sought in a rate design, it's appropriate and commonplace to study the impact on thorough costs and benefit studies. A few of the benefits that should be considered, and this is just a few, in evaluating rooftop solar energy sold to a utility, include economic impact. Chuck will, who has joined us, he will address much of that economic impact for Florida. Resilience benefits due to solar being able to keep power going when we experience grid failure. Reduced need for infrastructure investments by utility to supply energy to a growing state population. Rooftop solar also provides a fuel cost price hedge benefit to utilities by reducing the reliance on other fuel sources that are susceptible to shortages and market price volatility. Now, currently there are 2 bills moving in the state legislature that you've probably heard about that will greatly reduce the rate at which FPL buys excess energy from customers. The reduction substantially changes the financial returns for a resident who already has or will invest in rooftop solar, those being SB 1024 and HB 741. FPL, in filing these, with the appropriate legislators, claims that net metering allows rooftop solar customers to lower their bills too much, which would place undue burden on customers that do not have solar. FPL, however, has not performed an actual cost of service study. What does it actually cost to serve both non-rooftop solar and solar customers? So even if it was true, FPL does not actually know what it costs to serve solar customers and whether or not there is any potential shortfall being covered by non-solar customers. That's just an important fact up front, because without that cost of service study, we really don't know what that means for ratepayers in general in Florida. So just some really other quick questions and concerns in the bill that we see, and these are just sort of good business principle concerns. Anti-competition comes to mind when a monopoly utility writes a bill that will push back on a small level of competition within their industry, and is the bill the product of a broad stakeholder process in order to write the best policy. Collaboration is key when you're discussing energy policy. It's a solution to an unproven problem, which I've already covered in the subsidy aspect. There is definitely a lack of gradualism in implementing this bill. Changes to a market should be gradual and thoughtful so as not to cause immediate job loss and declining sales. And there is inadequate customer protection, considering that thousands of current solar owners bought into this rate schedule, this rate system, and were able to identify a return on investment that will no longer be accurate and reflective of what they predicted when they invested and financed solar on top of their roof. And there's lots of other concerns, but I felt it was good to quickly bring those up before introducing Chuck. So in order to make an informed analysis of the bill, it's critical to understand the financial and economic opportunity for Florida within the rooftop solar energy industry. And I'm pleased to invite Chuck Yaros to the conversation.
Good morning, all. Ryan, thank you for inviting me to talk about the economic aspects of rooftop solar in Florida. Like to start off with a couple of statistics. First and foremost, we are 4th in the nation in Florida in the size of our rooftop solar industry. We generate these are numbers from 2019, which were the latest available when we did our analysis. Solar from all sources generates about 3% of the power needs in Florida and is in aggregate about as much as 780,000 homes demand over the course of a year. There are over 400 businesses in Florida that are involved in all aspects of providing solar power. At the time we did our study, the projections were that over 12,000 megawatt hours of additional generating capacity were likely to have been added in the rooftop solar area in the next 5 years. There are approximately 60,000 renewable power systems throughout the state interconnected to the state's utilities. It's in addition to the major players, also the local and municipal systems that are located throughout Florida. And in 2019, that customer group received almost $1 million of cash from the utilities for the excess power that they put onto the grid. Now, what does that mean in terms of economic impact? When we do our analysis, we focus in on a couple of things. We focus on jobs. We focus on total income generated by people working and economic impact. And then finally, we try and make an estimate of the taxes that are generated by all of this activity. And in total, in Florida in 2019, it was just over 40,000 jobs that were created. Now, all of those were not in the solar industry. Only about 8,900 of those were directly attributable to rooftop solar. The other 31,000 actually came from industries that supply the solar power industry, as well as jobs that are created by workers in the industry and in their suppliers as they live. So in aggregate, that adds up to just over 40,000 jobs. In terms of income, about 1.3 billion of that is directly in the industry. And then there's another almost 2 billion of worker income created in suppliers and other industries. In terms of economic impact, it totals to 18.3 billion. Again, spread primarily across mix of the industry itself, suppliers, and what we call induced impacts, but it's all the other people in the community who support everybody going about their job. It's the grocery store, it's the dry cleaner, it's the movie theater, etc. And that all generates about $3.2 billion of taxes that go to state, local, and federal governments.
Thank you, Chuck. That's great.
You're welcome.
Some of the top highline economic impact points that we wanted our audience to understand today. And, those are obviously some of the big top line implications. There's some big numbers there. I thought one of the most impressive was, the difference between how many jobs you indicated were directly related to solar companies versus the supply chain versus industries associated that deliver to that industry. Can you tell us a little bit more about that in terms of those indirect jobs that are, so in other words, changing policy with net metering potentially changes policy or the amount of sales within the solar industry. How does that impact? What are the other types of industries that are associated with that 31,000 jobs number, for example, that you mentioned?
Well, when we looked at the industry, we found that the people who are directly involved, these are the people who actually go out and set up the rooftop installations, install all the equipment, work with the power companies to make sure that the interconnections are functioning properly. Those are by and large small firms. It's generally, the lead person and a few helpers who are, actually out there doing that day in, day out. But there's a huge number of individuals who are involved in things like manufacturing the solar panels, manufacturing the interconnection equipment. And the other thing is that this is what we call a knowledge-intensive industry because you're working with state-of-the-art materials, electronics, et cetera. And there's fairly involved processes where some highly specific knowledge is needed in order to safely install these installations and make sure that they're working properly.
That's great, Chuck. Two quick things on that. Number one, I want to point out for everybody if they don't know this, but the Jacksonville area is actually home to Jinko Solar, which is one of the largest solar panel manufacturers in the United States. So that is just a critical good piece of it. Obviously, if they're doing less sales, that's going to impact their impact on the Florida market. But I think that you actually said something really interesting, and it's I can't recall if it's in the report that you all produced back in, I think it was November. However, you mentioned that a lot of these solar companies are small businesses. Is that an accurate representation of the industry, that these are, for the most part, most solar companies in Florida are going to be small businesses, and therefore it's important to hear their voice and their impact, when it comes to what the impact looks like if change comes too quickly via these pieces of legislation?
By and large, that was what we found in terms of the people who are interfacing and doing the installations. Those are relatively small firms. There's not a lot of employees. It's not a case, it is, these people are, as I see it, in many ways similar to an awful lot of the, for a quick comparison, the home improvement industry, where we all get these circulars in the mail every so often that, we've got a guy who installs impact windows. This is a guy who does over bathrooms or kitchens, et cetera. And those tend to be small operations with, not a lot of employees, focusing on one-off jobs, et cetera, as compared to a major home builder who might come in, buy a tract of land and put up 250 homes.
Fantastic. Got a few more questions, I think, before we, maybe turn it on to the next topic of conversation. But Chuck, can you tell us, and this is sort of a broad question, but if the financial implications, if the rates are dramatically changed by which solar customers receive for their excess energy generation sent to a utility, what are some of the largest implications of that change on the industry and on the Florida economy when you shift and change something pretty drastically? That's the way that businesses or industry has been doing business for years.
Well, if, for example, you are changing the reimbursement structure for excess power contributed to the grid, and going from, say, the rate that utilities charge homeowners for power taken from the grid to something like a wholesale price that varies over the course of the day based on the national market. And let's just for a moment assume that that is significantly less than the retail price, where it may or may not be, depending on the situation. You're changing the economics, and you're probably putting a freeze on the installations of new systems while everybody sorts out the numbers. And where you're going to see that impact first is on those 400 odd businesses that do business in solar. They are going to be shut down overnight, or nearly shut down overnight, as they work off any existing backlog of work. And that will ripple back through to the suppliers, in that, to the extent that an installer goes from having 10 installations next month to 1, he is only going to be buying 10% of the solar panels that he was planning to buy previously. And therefore, the panel manufacturer, the interconnection equipment, the control equipment, the battery storage equipment, whatever else you're talking about that goes in addition to these panels, those people are going to see their orders shrivel overnight, while everybody sits down and sorts this out and sees if there's a viable way forward. And, we're talking about businesses that don't have huge capital reserves and able to weather a business winter. And that's particularly true after COVID has turned up our lives upside down for the last 2 years.
Great points. I mean, just on the very base level of that conversation, Chuck, is, they have existing supplies of materials that they use to install these solar installations. And with a different rate structure in place and a different return on investment for customers, it's very likely they may have to source all new materials, cheaper materials to provide a cheaper installation. It's not so easy for a small firm to even retool all their marketing documents, for example, overnight. So you bring up some really good points there. Another quick question for you is, given that there has not been a cost-benefit analysis done in Florida when it comes to solar customers, as an economist, we've seen kind of this common talking point that non-rooftop solar customers are subsidizing rooftop solar customers. Is that a fair statement if we don't know the true cost or we don't know the benefits that rooftop solar could provide to the grid? And again, that's a question related to you being the studied, educated economist that you are and preparing that way.
Let me offer a firm maybe, because I am not cognizant of all the details that the legislature took a look at when they originally passed the net metering legislation, or B, the materials that have been generated either by the legislature, by the PUC, or the utilities for that matter since that time. I would argue strongly that if you're going to make a change of this nature, you definitely need to throw all of the issues out on the table and have a discussion based on facts. The point of there needs to be an explicit cost applied to the maintenance of the grid, which is the wires that go from the utility out to the final user and back. That certainly needs to be looked at. And I would argue, irrespective of what you do with net metering, given that we as a nation are somewhere at the start of a transition away from a fossil fuel powered vehicle fleet to an electrically powered vehicle fleet, that needs to be done immediately, because as you transition over 300 million vehicles in this country to electricity as their source of fuel, you are changing the entire structure of the electricity demand system. And we need to look at that issue along with everything else. Second, we really should have a discussion as to what as a state is going to be our stance on renewable energy. Are we going to go strictly for the lowest cost source at any one point in time, irrespective of the long run consequences, both economic and non-economic? Or are we going to bring those things into the equation and attempt to assign a value to those?
Great.
And these are all things that will trigger lengthy debates, but need to be resolved as a part of this, because the decision that is made on net metering, the decision that is made on assigning a value to the grid and its long-term maintenance in a form that it meets the needs of the public, are all valid things that have to go into this.
Great concluding points, because I think that's one of my biggest concerns is when changes are made in policy without looking at all of the other things that we ought to be considering at the time. And certainly gradualism when it comes to making this change, if there are determined that changes need to be made, there's obviously more harm in making drastic changes right away than in terms of phasing change in over time. So really solid, good points there. And thank you for all the work that your firm's done in terms of organizing a really great report on behalf of Conservatives for Clean Energy, looking at the impact of the Florida rooftop solar industry in our state. So I want to thank you, Chuck, for joining us. We are going to pivot to our next aspect of the conversation. And I do want to share that the report that the World Economics Group did on behalf of Conservatives for Clean Energy, we will share that with all of our attendees, the link to that. It's a very thorough economic impact report. As well as Chambers for Innovation and Clean Energy, we have produced two documents that we will share with you as well. One is on the net metering issue itself as a background piece of information, a document. And then the other is sort of a breakdown from a business and economic perspective of the two bills that are seeking to change rooftop solar compensation. And it's always a challenge when you have members that are utilities to maybe push back. But I think there's questions that need to be asked. I think there's considerations that should be put in place. I think that a broad stakeholder process is something that chambers understand more than any other in terms of convening affected parties and trying to be the place for common ground. That if there's anything that a chamber is set up to do, it is looking to bring common ground to a particular issue. So thank you very much. And we will share that with you all. And now I'm going to turn the time over to Alan Bird. Alan is CICE's Florida Director of Outreach and also handles outsourced communications and marketing for the Seminole County Chamber, along with other clients that he has throughout the state of Florida. He's going to lead a discussion on opportunities associated with the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And with that, I turn it to Alan.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you everybody for attending today. We are waiting for Congressman Soto, who will be joining us in a few minutes here. But right now, we do have Kimberly, who has more than 21 years of experience in business diversity and community relations. A couple of folks that she's worked for in the past include the Florida Governor's Office, Orange County Public Schools, the Greater Orlando Aviation Authority, and as a consultant for the Department of Transportation. Currently, she is the CEO of 3D Strategic Management and also the operator of the Orlando MBDA Business Center, which is a portion of the United States Department of Commerce. Kimberly, how are you doing today?
Wow. Thank you so much for reading the whole entire thing. I'm doing well.
Maybe you could start out a little bit. Just talk about what exactly does the MBDA do for small businesses?
Absolutely. So thank you for the opportunity, Alan, and thank you, Ryan, and the entire both organizations for the opportunity to be here today. The Orlando MBDA Business Center is a portion of the U.S. Department of Commerce Minority Business Development Agency. Its sole purpose is to help minority business to scale to capacity, to provide them resources they need. Here in Orlando, we have an operator of the center here. Our services are free to members. The only qualification is that your business has to be in existence for 2 years and that you have a certain revenue. So we can discuss that offline, but otherwise the services are free. So we look at, we'll do an intake analysis of your business. And if you need marketing, branding, legal services, financial services, access to contracts, access to capitals, or even global market, we're here to assist at no cost.
So one of the things I know where the Congressman Soto is going to talk a lot about, but there's about $7.2 billion with a B dollars available for electronic vehicle charging stations and infrastructure EV. What are some of the steps that our chamber members and the businesses throughout Florida need to make sure they cover right now to be qualified for some of these funds?
Absolutely. Yeah. So that 7.5 billion, right, is to go for a network of about over 500,000 charging stations, right? So when we're looking at how that number breaks down, and I don't want to steal anyone's information, but 4.5 is going to be to the states through a formula system. And then 2.5 is going to go through grants. So the question is, how do you get prepared? And it's important to get prepared now. So on a federal level, you want to make sure that you, and if Congressman comes in, please just let me know. But if you are looking to get ready, because you want to be ready, willing, and able, the first thing you want to do on a federal level is all grants will go through grants.gov. We advertise in grants.gov. But the step is to, one, obtain a DUNS number. If you don't have a DUNS number, the next step is to obtain an EIN number if you don't have an EIN number. The next step is to register in SAMS.gov. SAMS is the Systems for Award Management. And then the next step is to create a user password and username in grants.gov. We can assist you with that, but that process can take anywhere from a week to a month. So as you're looking at getting ready for any of these solicitations that are coming through grants.gov, you want to make sure that you're ready. So I just want to talk about one opportunity that's currently in grants.gov. So the opportunity is FM-MHP. It is for commercial motor vehicles. It's through DOT. It was released on February 3rd. The closing date is March 3rd. The ceiling is $2 million, and it's for small businesses. One of the things you want to make sure is that when you go into any solicitation, you want to look at the eligibility to see whether or not it's for a state entity, a nonprofit, a higher education, a small business, so that you can make sure before, as you're vetting the opportunity, you know exactly whether or not you are eligible.
What?
Sorry. I just want to go through Florida real quick. So we know that Florida is going to possibly get around 198 million. Again, I don't want to steal anybody's thunder. So in the state of Florida, you want to make sure that you're looking at FDOT, Florida Highway, and those solicitations, and making sure that you're registered as a vendor with the Division of Corporation, and that you also register within your city and your county municipality as well. So those will be funding through. And if you are small business, start formulating relationships now for joint ventures or partnerships so that you can get in a position that you can go after any opportunity that may come down the pipeline. There is one opportunity on the federal level, and it's, I'm not sure if anyone on the call, I'm sure everyone on the call is familiar with the rural opportunities to use transportation for economic success, are also known as ROOTS initiative, and that's through DOT. That's really targeting those rural areas within the state. But they are having there's a toolkit that's been released, and they're having a webinar tomorrow. So if you have not had a chance to register, go ahead and register for that toolkit tomorrow. The webinar for the toolkit, it's tomorrow at 1:30 p.m. so that you can get that information about that opportunity too, and how to be prepared for it. And the last thing I want to talk, so we talked about federal, getting ready on the federal level, getting ready on the state level. On a private level, I just had a conversation with a representative from Duke Energy. And to Chuck's point, Duke Energy is really taking an aggressive stance in making sure that they're recruiting small and diverse businesses to promote and install solar panels. They want to make sure that, and I can actually show you, I just had one of the representatives from Duke on the phone because I was like, call me back, I want to get more information. So when that's on, you can call me privately if you're interested in that. The whole purpose is Duke wants to make sure that they are bringing all of these small businesses together. I will send an email around. Yep, Megan. That they want to make sure they're bringing all of these organizations together so that they can, Chuck, to your point, to be able to assist them and to manage this internally. So that's just one opportunity from a private level. But be reaching out to, if you're a small business, if you're a woman-owned business, if you're a minority businesses, these private entities have participation percentages. They have goals and aspirations with small businesses as well. They want to be able to say and tout that they're doing business with small businesses and women-owned businesses. So reach out to those organizations so that you can make sure that you're in their supplier portal so that you're getting the information.
Hey, Kimberly, there's a question in Zoom that I wanted to run by you and ask, and maybe you know this, and Congressman Soto is just about here, but okay. If a Florida city or county wants to apply for the grants for EVs, what specific points will be required or improve their chances to get the grant? For example, do these public access to the EVSE chargers? Does the city county provide maintenance, install signage, enforce parking, website posts, et cetera? Any thoughts on that?
So when it looks for the state, they're looking for the data to support the need in the areas, and then the strategic partners for which they can be successful. I'd have to look actually at the NOFO if it's a notice of intent or if it's a RFP or ITN or whatever, to find out exactly the scoring matrix. That would be the most important thing.
So, and again, like I said, I've heard the congressman is working to get himself on right here. So let's
and when he comes out,
a little bit,
bow out.
No, absolutely, and this has all been very, very helpful. And we'll. They wanted also in chat to email around, and maybe you could put in chat when we're done here, the how to do business with link that you talked about. That would be good as well. Talk about maybe if you know, and because you're heavily involved with the DOT, what is the process for communities to really go through and get the funds that are being passed through from federal government to the state DOT? Has that been determined yet?
Not that I'm aware of, that doesn't mean that it hasn't been determined. I can tell you from a state perspective, you want to look at, especially with DOT, DOT is divided into districts. So you want to make sure that you develop a relationship with your district and your district secretary. So we're in in Orlando, we're in District 5. And District 5's office is in Sanford. It's eluding me. However, I would encourage you to get in contact with the district that you're in within Florida.
One of the other things that I was interesting in that toolkit, and by all means, please go search and look for that toolkit. It's got
I'll provide the link in the chat.
Great, fantastic. What was the definition? I didn't see this, but what is a rural area according to the federal government?
Good question, right? It's like, it's one of those things where it's really hard to define. It could be, and it just depends, but it's two different definitions that I've seen. One is a city that has less than 200,000. That was one definition. Another definition is a city that had anywhere between 20,000 and 50,000. Again, those are two drastically different numbers. But you want to look at the urbanization and see whether or not it depends on the solicitation.
Gotcha. And the other thing that's important in this is disadvantaged communities. Is there any sort of determination on what that could be as well?
Yeah, there's a high preference and a high priority for rural communities, disadvantaged communities, low-income communities, to make sure that they have access to these resources and grants as well. So if you are in an area, or if you can connect to that area and those resources in the area to get into some type of partnership or joint venture, so that you're developing these alliances now, when the monies and the funds do come and they're posted soon, and then you'll be in a position. But there is a very high importance on the rural areas, because we know that if you're in a rural area, it takes you a lot longer to drive into the city if you need to. That's more gas. That's more, damage to our environment. So that's why it's more of a priority than anything.
Fantastic. So how important and we've got a lot of chamber folks on here who can really lead community efforts for this sort of thing. How important is to get the community's buy-in, to rally the community to get one of these grants? So let's say we wanted to put a charger at every hotel in Orlando, because that's one of the things is trying to get these chargers in hotels. How important is it for the chambers to really put together these organizations and work with the local MPOs or the local DOT offices to get that? What's the critical steps there?
It's vital right now to make sure that you are developing those strategic relationships, but also, for instance, in the last NOFO, the notice of intent that was in grants.gov, if you were a nonprofit foundation, you had to get a letter from a political designee to approve you to be able to go after this particular one. It was a good jobs challenge through the EDA, as a matter of fact. However, so all of these things are important because they want to make sure that there's an ecosystem of everyone working together to utilize the funds, and that you're not being redundant in some places, and then also leaving out other areas. So, and most of these grants are written with a community-focused intent for everyone to work together, for all the partners that come to the table together.
Who would be some of the critical partners that you must have in these efforts?
Definitely want to have your city, state, municipalities. You want to have some of your key advocates, your chambers, like, Alan and Ryan, definitely from them. You want to have any key person like Chuck to be able to vouch for the credibility of the team. in most proposals, they're looking for the resources, but they're looking for the leadership. They're looking for the bios of the leadership, the longevity in that particular area, and their previous performance of success.
And here is Congressman Soto. Kimberly, was there anything else that you had to add, or should we just go ahead and jump on to Congressman Soto right now?
I just want to say welcome, Congressman Soto. I'm excited to see you here today, and thank you, Alan and Ryan, for the opportunity to speak. I'm bowing out now.
Fantastic. And if you could put some of that stuff in the chat, that was very good information that everybody needs. So just a very, very quick introduction of my friend, Congressman Soto, who I've known, probably 15, 20 years now. But Congressman Soto was first elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 2016 to represent the 9th Congressional District of Florida, which includes all of Osceola County, Orange, and Polk County. He was elected to the state House back in, I guess, 2006, and then to the Senate, serving in the legislature for a decade. And one quick thing that I always found fascinating with Congressman Soto is how good of a musician and guitar player he is, because he has his own band that goes around and plays, and they're quite good. So Kimberly, just to catch you up, Kimberly gave us a lot of kind of the technical information. But one of the things, maybe you could talk a lot, $7.2 billion for EV infrastructure in the infrastructure bill. Talk a little bit more about what exactly is the point of those, and how can we really bring some of that bacon home to Florida?
Well, this is a special time, Alan, and it's great to see you. Appreciate our work together over the years, particularly on business issues and clean energy. I also want to thank Kimberly for being flexible of me having to pop in right now. So thank you, Kimberly, for your courtesy as I'm popping out of the Natural Resources Committee for a few minutes to be able to meet with you all. So big picture, this is an exciting time because we passed the Build Back Better infrastructure package. And now there's real resources, and there's others also on the horizon potentially as well. So just in the infrastructure framework, we see Florida will receive about $198 million for the expansion of EV charging stations over the next 5 years. That's on top of the settlement money with Volkswagen that has already been started to be used. You'll see the charging stations on the Turnpike and other areas of the state, and starting to see local governments like my hometown of Kissimmee having a few of them right by the courthouse, in City Hall, obviously Orlando as well on their way. And then Florida's eligible to apply for up to $2.5 billion in grants available for EV charging. So there's a couple ways this is going to flow. It can be said for the broader amount of money that Florida's eligible for, up to $50 billion under the infrastructure law. $30 billion of that will flow through federal grants. So it's local governments, local businesses applying. You definitely want to engage your member of Congress. This is very important because it's federal right down to local, whether it's our businesses or whether it's our local governments. I've been on a streak of meeting with over a dozen of our local governments so far. We have 19 in the district, 16 cities, and 3 counties. And I'm about at 14 of them and counting. The other way, some of that funding is going to flow through the state, about 20 billion of it. But just specifically for the EV charging stations, Florida's going to receive 198 million. So that you're going to have to duke it out in the Florida legislature for. We'll certainly write letters of support and work to encourage our state legislators and the governor. But that's something that you're going to have to take the long 4-hour drive up to Tallahassee to fight for, and hopefully you'll be charging your vehicles on the way up there. And then the other 2.5 billion, so the bigger chunk of money, is going to be grants available. Those will be a lot through local governments, businesses. On this call, you're going to want to work with local governments, team up with them on it, whether it's there may be some ability individually for major companies to be able to expand EVs for their employees and their businesses. But a lot of it's going to be you work with Osceola County, you work with Orange County, they draw down a grant your business or clients are benefit from that because the EV charging stations are located in an area that makes business sense for them, in a parking lot of a major employer, on a route that's a commute for many of the folks you work with. There's also going to be jobs in building all this, right? So those of you who are EV contractors and are interested in that, that's certainly going to be a lot of jobs created as we're building out our network. Right now, we're in an interesting situation with electric vehicles. Hybrids are the most popular right now. I think people are putting, for new purchases right now, I think people are putting one foot in, still in the past and one foot in the future, just testing the waters a little bit. And of course, because of microchips, that has slowed down the number of new cars being built right now. The good news is we're building microchips in Central Florida, now in the district at Neo City, and you may have heard about the American Rescue Plan, which shots in arms, money in pockets, helped avoid a great recession. Then the infrastructure package, the law that we just passed that we're talking about here. We're working on another law called the American Competes Act that passed out of the House, and that boosts chip production. So that should help with over the long term increasing electric vehicle supply. So that's going to be a critical part of it as well, that we're going to be increasing the number of EVs on the road. And a lot of those hybrids, they're fully charging and gas rather than the ones that internally charge. So we're going to need to build out a whole program. The last thing I'll say is the electric vehicle formula program, up to $5 billion, provides funding to states to strategically deploy EV charging infrastructure and establish an interconnected network. So there's even money to help the Florida Department of Transportation come up with their strategic plan. So that again would flow. They won't get the full $5 billion. That's for all the states, but we're here to help out. My office, lastly, can also assist, obviously, if your business is in the district or you're working on projects in the district, to help with technical assistance through getting the agencies to meet with you to go over applications. We do that exclusively for folks where the businesses are located in district or the project is. If not, there are many other great members that will be able to assist you with that. That's kind of the waterfront on some of that. There are also funds that are going to flow down through utilities for resiliency. We saw $404 million announcement by Governor DeSantis. That is your American Rescue dollars at work here in the state of Florida. I don't know how much that made it into his press release, but that's where the money came from the American Rescue Plan. And so that funding is also for those of you who work in small grid or solar companies or working with some of the larger energy companies. That's going to be resiliency. The last thing I'll say, on the horizon, we passed the Build Back Better Act out of the House. It did not pass the Senate yet, and it probably will be broken up in several pieces. There's one key piece to watch for your group. We had $500 billion, $500 billion with a T, in grants for utilities, for solar, for wind, for next generation batteries, for resiliency, and for EV charging stations. Because it's reconciliation, it's not much policy, it's pretty much mostly money to help us combat climate change and get to our 2030 and 2050 goals. That piece still has a lot of support in the Senate. So you could see a separate bill come out that goes to the Senate just on the Build Back Better funding for electric vehicles, renewables, and others. So I know that's a lot, Alan, but I wanted to give you all the full waterfront. Thank you so much, by the way. The full waterfront of what we're working on and what's already law and what is on the horizon.
Well, one thing, just to find out what the grants are, and also remember that we have people throughout the state. The Congressman, this is one of the specialties of congressional offices, is working with companies and chambers and organizations to do that. One quick question, because I know we want to turn it over to Scott with some of the things that are going on in Tallahassee, and you also have other things in DC calling you out as well. But how do you find out specifically what grants are available? And what's the first, who should you ask for in any congressional office for help?
So first off, there's a lot of this publicly available, everything from press releases from the White House to the Department of Energy, EPA, Department of Transportation. So be on the lookout. They're going to try to prominently place those. Just a lot of people don't go on those websites all the time. But this is a sophisticated crowd, and that's one of the things you're going to do. Two, you can reach out to members of Congress, our ledge team, and usually our district directors or outreach. So we have multiple people working on it. The ledge team would help with a letter of support to draft it. Darren Verde with our team would work on local grants, chambers, labor unions. So he'd be who you'd be interfacing with. And then the ledge team would help draft everything up. And then while we can't guide you on your grants, we can identify and help with basic areas to go to. And then the letter supports the big role, as well as getting technical assistance from the agencies. While we can't give you technical assistance, the agencies can. It's much more likely if you're teaming up with a local government to get the agencies to give you technical assistance. So the local governments are your friends. They're going to be the ones who are applying for a lot of these federal grants in conjunction with their local businesses, their local chambers of commerce, their local AFL-CIO, their folks who are working with their local commissioners. So it could be an application that's a public-private partnership, but that's going to be where a lot of these are very successful. And then you're applying federal straight to local, so you don't have to duke it out for a lot of that money, but some of it, it's going to be then Florida Department of Transportation, Florida DEO, and FDEP, so Environmental Protection, Economic Development, and Transportation. So you're going to want to have a federal and state strategy. Local governments are the great partners to work with, and particularly for the federal grants, working with congressional office is absolutely going to be critical. The president's mentioned it many times. Mayor Landrieu, who's the transportation czar, has mentioned it many times, that they're going to want to see federal support. And if you get bipartisan support, that's even better, right? And so that's sort of the path forward for a lot of you.
Well, Congressman, thank you very much for spending a couple minutes here with us today. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to our last section of our conversation. And I would like to introduce Scott Thomason, who is president of Sunbelt Strategies, a Florida policy consulting firm with whom we've worked with for many years and is an active presence at the Florida Capitol. Scott, maybe you would like to share what's going on today as well, in light of our earlier discussion too.
Sure, and I'll speed it up because I know we're pushing the limit on time here, but wanted to cover a couple energy and electric vehicle related bills that are moving through the legislature that aren't net metering, as Ryan talked about earlier. That's sort of sucking all the oxygen out of the room on energy in Tallahassee, but there are a couple others. There's been a bunch of bills introduced, but the percentage in Tallahassee for passing bills is less than 10% of what's introduced. So they don't all move through the process very far. And so I'm just going to focus on a couple that are moving and may have a chance to pass either this session or next. The first, since we were just talking about EVs, Senator Broder, who is from Seminole and is actually the CEO of the Seminole Chamber. So I know a few of you know him, and he's worked with Chambers for Innovation on another event. He's got a modest bill that could have a big impact. That makes it easier for state governments and for some local governments to modernize their fleet procurement. So the cars and trucks that they buy in large numbers, and make it easier for those cities to buy electric vehicles. There's actually a Charlie Crist era law from when he was governor from 2008 that was trying to be environmentally friendly and climate friendly, and so forced all these agencies to buy cars based on fuel efficiency. And it turns out that has unintended consequences these days when you can't really evaluate electric vehicles on fuel efficiency, and they've got other cost advantages other than efficiency. So Senator Broder spotted this. He's updating it so that there's a level playing field in the cost comparisons. And that can make a big deal, not only for the state governments, but a lot of local agencies, local governments procure their vehicles through a state master procurement contract and sort of ride the coattails of the state's buying power. So it will have an impact at the local level also. And that same bill also streamlines local permitting for rooftop solar and for EV chargers. And this has just been an issue across Florida. Mentioned earlier that a lot of the solar companies are small businesses and are trying to get a rooftop system installed, and in some jurisdictions that requires a roofing inspector to come out and an electrical inspector, and it takes an extra month to get a permit compared to the city right down the road. So this just sort of streamlines, offers some alternatives to those small businesses that are, trying to move through the process so their customers can go solar or add EVs to their homes. Both of these have some support from the bigger players at the Capitol, including the utilities who have sort of nodded in that this bills can move forward. So there's a good chance that'll pass. And the House sponsor for that is Representative Drake, who's from the Panhandle in Walton County. There's another EV bill that will likely not pass this session, but will be a big debate next session. So in the 2023 session. And this is a bill by Senator Perry, who's from the Gainesville area, that takes on this debate of who's going to build all these charging stations. What's that market going to look like? Are the utilities going to have an advantage in being able to use their customer base to sort of subsidize and spread out the costs of those? Or is it going to be a purely competitive market? So on one side, you've got the gas station owners arguing for a competitive market where the utilities don't get any unfair advantages. And then, of course, the utilities have their own plans where they want to really encourage charging stations, make them available, keep the state, try to keep up with the demand for charging stations. And their argument is that they can move faster to do that and more strategically. But the fact that you've got two pretty powerful interests in Tallahassee gearing up to lock horns on this will make a pretty interesting issue next session. And it's had some hearings already this session, but because we're sort of focused on other things this year, that's probably not going to really catch steam until next session. But stay tuned, that's going to be a big one. And the last one I'll mention really quickly is one for floating solar installations. Senator Diaz and Representative Avila, who are both from the greater Miami area, both have bills that would encourage local governments to, approve siting for floating solar. And these would mostly be in man-made waterways. So reservoirs, water treatment plants, and abandoned rock mines, actually, like limestone mines, have these big bodies of water sitting on them. And the folks that own that property really want to put solar on them. And, it's a niche industry in Florida. The guys that make the ballasts for this floating solar are located in Florida. And, Ryan mentioned the panel manufacturers. So there's actually a lot of jobs that could come from this. And so both of those have cleared two committees. Well, one is this afternoon, one's going to be in a couple hours, but they're moving at a speed that looks like they may make it to the floor and pass. So that's an interesting one, for folks. There aren't a lot of these floating solar yet, but right, I did see Altamonte Springs has an array, and the Orlando Airport has a small one, and I know Chris Castro in Orlando is always excited about the floating solar. So it's a niche issue, but it's a really passionate one for a lot of folks in Florida, and one that may make it through, because who's against it, really? Nobody. And those, so there are a bunch of other bills, but those are the ones we have time to highlight now, and I'll give it back to Ryan.
Thank you, Scott. And yes, clearly there's a lot of other bills out there, but I really appreciate you condensing your time and hitting some of the more important issues for Chambers to understand. As always, Scott, we appreciate you taking time away from the legislative session to talk with us. And honestly, thank you to all of our presenters who joined us today. The information and expertise you shared is invaluable to Chamber and economic development professionals who've joined us today. So we appreciate you all. Thank you also to the Florida Association of Chamber Professionals for co-hosting this event. And thank you to all of you, our attendees, for spending an hour with us to learn a little bit more about clean energy and EV-related issues in the state of Florida. As a follow-up, we will be sharing links and various documents related to our discussions. We will be emailing out those as well. And please reach out to us with any questions related to those documents, those events, or anything else that we've talked about today. We are more than happy to talk through any issue or any concerns or questions you may have. So with that, once again, on behalf of Chambers for Innovation and Clean Energy and all of our presenters today and our co-host, FACP, we thank you for joining us and hope you have a really great day.